Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try to squeeze in a presentation before a food coma sets in. I am Dave. I do work at Google. I am very grateful to be here this afternoon. Last year, I was very fortunate to be asked to speak at SRECon, and I thought, you know, if you're going to come speak, you should generate a little controversy, then they might invite you back. So that's what I tried to do. And I came to make an argument to everyone in this room that it was insufficient for us to learn and adopt SRE practices, that in fact, to achieve the world we really want to achieve for just the limited scope of our products and services, we were going to have to get our customers to adopt SRE. And that was a mildly controversial statement, and I spent 40-ish minutes giving reasons for it. If you weren't here or don't remember it, that's a URL and a QR code. You can just take a picture of it, and you go back and refresh your recollection and potentially your outrage, and that will be perfectly fine. I'm actually out of complete morbid curiosity. Show of hands, was anyone in this room in that talk last year? Oh, a shockingly high percentage. I expected like 3 hands. Neat. Okay, for those who were not or perhaps don't remember it, we'll do a super fast TLDR. Okay. The quick summary goes like this. The most important feature of any system is its reliability. Why? Because if our users perceive a thing to be unreliable, they won't trust it. If they don't trust it, they won't use it. If they don't use it, it is not valuable. Strictly speaking, as a business, you can't monetize a system that nobody uses. That is a fantastic recipe for bankruptcy. That is not particularly controversial, I don't think, in this room. Okay, the next point. You'll note I said in the bullet previous, the reliability as our users perceive it. That's actually the thing that matters, is how reliable do they think our system is? Or perhaps more succinctly, our monitoring and logs and alerting do not define our reliability. Our users' perceptions do. It does us literally no good. If we think we are delivering a 5.9 system and they feel like they are experiencing a 1.5.9 system. That is a recipe for terribleness. If your system is a platform in any way, shape, or form, then the reliability experience of your user is a partnership. Just to say there's only some amount of work you can do as an SRE on your platform to deliver a good reliability experience to your customer, because much of it will depend on the choices they make. What they choose to build on your platform, how they choose to integrate, how they choose to operate the system they have built that depends on your platform, and so forth. It's just basic math. You know, a system that can only get 2 nines because of its operations, even running on a 5.9 platform, is going to experience slightly less than 2 nines. And this matters because, you know, humans, because of the recency bias of memory, all they will remember about your system is how they felt interacting with it. They won't remember whose, quote, fault it was that they had a bad experience. Just that I remember when I have to build on this thing, it wasn't pleasant. Not that I was the source of the unpleasantness. And finally, just for completeness, I made an argument that every system after a certain size and a certain popularity eventually gets an API and becomes a platform. So the previous bullet will apply to all of you, even if it doesn't apply to you now. The argument, there's a much longer argument, more rigorous argument, but the basic argument is fairly simple. If systems are more valuable with the number of users who use them, and it's nonlinear, it's exponential, then, meaning they suffer from network effects, great. Then it's much cheaper if you have a lot of users and some other system has a lot of users for the two of you to connect your systems via APIs, so that you can gain access to each user base, rather than you having to go recruit individually the users of the other system to join your user pool. That's why everything gets an API eventually, everything of a certain popularity, and we can talk about whether you get an official one or unofficial one, but it actually doesn't change the calculus. So that led us, at the end of 40 some odd minutes, to the conclusion that the only way this is going to work for you is if you also push SRE principles and practices to your users. Because they will eventually be building things and operating things that will depend on you, and their memory of your system will be emotionally rooted in their mind about how they experience reliability, and they will forget the details of who was proximally to blame for an incident. And you need to talk to them. You need to communicate them in a common language. SLOs and SLIs and error budgets are a fabulous common language to use, and you can reduce all sorts of friction in troubleshooting things and so forth. Okay, again, we had a whole 40-some-odd minute talk that went through and tried to rigorously prove these things. We're not going to do that here. One more point. We believe this very firmly at Google, so much so that in late 2016, we created a new branch of SRE at Google called SRE, Customer Reliability Engineering. We are very experienced Google SREs. I think the median duration in Google SRE in this org is 11 years. That actually goes out and teaches customers and then also partners and service partners and tech partners and so forth how to do SRE. And it's a business imperative for us, right? If the industry doesn't perceive Google Cloud, in our particular case, this platform, as being reliable, then it won't use it, and that'll be substantial friction for adoption. And so we have to work very aggressively, and the standard modalities of teaching people things actually kind of don't work well when we're talking about ongoing things like operations. We launched it, and it was pretty popular. We got a lot of press, and yay, and that was fine. We got a bunch of customers, and you can do a Google search and find all of those case studies. I don't need to tell you about any of those things. So that brings us to this year. I feel very privileged to have been invited back to talk about. This was still early when I came here a year ago to talk about it. It was only a few months old. We didn't have a lot of data. So the question is, what have we learned a year later about trying to teach people how to do SRE? Yes, I'm using that in kind of a pejorative. So we're going to do some lessons. Okay, lesson number 1 from the counterintuitive file is that enterprises love SRE. Love, love, love. The bigger the company, the older the company, the more conservative, I guess you could call it, or the more change-averse its institution and its vertical, the more SRE appeals to them. Now that may seem counterintuitive, especially here in Silicon Valley, where we hold a particular view of enterprises, which, by the way, is wrong. So let me try to justify or explain at least why this turns out to be true. Okay, first thing, if you're an enterprise, you've been in business for a long time, well, you have systems that have been running for a long time, and you know in practice, right, that the runtime of a system is much longer than its deployment and development time. That seems manifestly obvious. And you've also discovered the tyranny of linear scaling, right? We all know as SREs that the number of humans, if you're mostly running a system manually, the number of humans will increase linearly with A, the complexity of the system, or B, or B, the number of users you get. Well, all businesses are in the business of getting more users over time, and no system is getting less complex over time, even mature ones, if for no other reason than the business environments are changing. Therefore, all businesses running in a traditional operations mode eventually experience exponential increase of the amount of human effort required to maintain a system. Then therefore the expense of operating the system quickly overwhelms any budget you might have for innovating against it, and it becomes ossified. And so every enterprise understands this reality. They've all lived it. And so any technique, any practice that says to them, you can dig out of that and start to recover that budget for innovation and progress the state of the art system is something people really glom onto. And the larger the enterprise, the more traditional the enterprise, the more they really feel that way, or the more they get it. Error budgets in SLOs and SLIs are very, 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 very appealing to CIOs, CTOs, VPs, and executroids of various scopes and types. And the reason is this. All of them suffer from what I like to call intuition fatigue. Right? So if you are a senior leader in an organization, people are coming and yelling at you about we have to slow down and make it more stable. We have to speed up and add more features. We have to do this, we do that. And you are making these decisions by intuition in most cases. You're using your gut. That's not a terribly reliable way to make a decision, statistically speaking, and it is a very emotionally exhausting way to do it because you know it's risky intuitively to do it. You're only one bad decision away from not employed anymore. And it's hard when you've dumped cortisol and adrenaline and to make these decisions in the spur of the moment. And so I call that intuition fatigue. They're actually very fatigued about having to make these decisions by gut. And so when you can give them a numeric framework, hey, you blew your error budget, you have this freeze policy, having blown your error budget. This is not a hard decision anymore. Like, we know what to do. In this case, they react very, very, very favorably to it. We find the more senior the person in the organization, the more enthusiastic they tend to be about adopting SRE. And in general, any system that lets them both go faster and be more reliable, and so therefore recover their innovation budget, in a sense, unpaints them from a corner they have painted themselves into over many decades of operating. Okay, so that's lesson number 1. Enterprises heart SRE. Okay, lesson number 2. I apologize, I have to keep walking forward so I can actually see the slides. The most important thing is the willingness. Period. The single most relevant metric you can look at when talking with your customer about adopting SRE is their emotional willingness to do the work. It is not about the technical competency of the organization. Sticking with enterprises for a minute, we have a myth. Well, let's just be frank and let's be honest with ourselves. We have a terribly ivory tower-esque view of the world here, standing in Silicon Valley, and that ivory tower view says that traditional enterprises, that the engineering talent in traditional enterprises isn't as good as it is here, whatever, for some measure of good. Or else why would they live in, wherever else they happen to be living, instead of living in the glorious, paradise of Silicon Valley or some such thing. All right, that's a lie. Let me just say that right now. I talk to enterprises all the time. They actually have really fantastic engineering talent. But more to the point, their engineering and operations talent is more than up to the task of adopting SRE. That is not a gate, period. Like if that's a mental model you have, like are my customers, quote, smart enough to do SRE? The answer is yes, they are. They may have skills gaps, but you can help them through that. That's not terribly hard. The key thing is the willingness. Are they willing to do it? Does it appeal to them? Can they internalize the idea that moving to a model of SLOs and error budgets, which is really the key thing, we'll get to that in a second, will make their lives better, and they're willing to invest and create the space to do it? And if the answer is yes, they are an excellent candidate for you to do the work with, and it doesn't matter from where they are starting. Companies that don't look anything like Google or Netflix or LinkedIn or Dropbox or any of the companies that we all know and love that do SRE and participate loudly in the SRE community themselves do SRE really well. Are there anyone in the room from the Home Depot? Yeah. Okay, so you should talk to these folks. Home Depot is a really traditional enterprise who does SRE really, really, really well. All right, so that's lesson number 2, is the most determining, like if we were doing a factors analysis, a statistical factors analysis, we would find that it's something like 0.96. That willingness is the thing that most determines success. Okay, lesson number 3, not hard. Easy to conceptualize, hard to implement. Everyone you talk to about adopting SRE, whom you might want to teach SRE, will want to start at step like 12. Do an analysis of an existing system, that kind of thing. Don't. Resist the urge. We've made this mistake. We've learned, I have actual scars on my back from this. You must start with the SLOs and the error budget. Period. There's literally no other place to start. Otherwise, you are building a different kind of organizational and technical debt with your customer. You have to start from the conversation of, let's see, let me disambiguate terms here for a minute. We're going to use a few terms here. A customer is someone who is building software that is interacting with your platform. A user is their user, someone that your customer is serving. Okay? Well, we're going to just settle on those terms for this. That way I can go a little bit faster. Okay. When you start to talk to a customer, what you have to explain to them is you have to start with SLOs and SLIs and then therefore error budgets. And it's the first thing. Like if all you get to do with these folks is denominate their business requirements in terms of SLIs and SLOs, you are way ahead of the game because at least you can talk to each other in common terms, right? And that's tough. Customers don't want to do that in the beginning. They want to jump into the thing. Like, no, why don't you tell me about what I'm doing in my design that's bad or how I can get more reliable? Well, no, hold on. I can't tell you how to get more reliability until you can express to me the reliability you need in a metric that I can grok and we can talk about on common terms, and that's what an SLO is. And they will resist you. They will. And you have to be more stubborn about it and say, look, we want to do this with you. We want to partner with you on this, but this is our price of entry. Like if you're really willing, then being willing is to do, a few weeks of work with us to be able to say what are credible SLIs for your users' experience, What would be credible SLOs so that you know your service is healthy? Now we can have a conversation about how you can design, and we can work together as partners so you can consistently achieve that SLO by depending on my system. So that's a lesson we've learned the hard way. Oh, customer quote. Yay, I like customer quotes. So Evernote has been fairly vocal recently about their journey along the SRE path. You can read what Ben McCormick, who's the chief of staff, he was the VP of operations at Evernote. He got a shiny new promotion. I like to think it's because they did this. He makes I think, the most important point. Like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. SLOs do not have to be perfect. They just have to be directionally accurate. You can iterate. Iterating is fine. Iterating, the process is the thing. Dwight Eisenhower, former president and head of Allied forces for World War II, had a saying, which I always loved, which is that plans are garbage, planning is golden. Right? Planning is the thing. It's the iteration of it. And that SLOs, like Mark Burgess, I don't know if Mark's here today, but Mark Burgess likes to say SLOs are essentially promises. And he's right. Speaking of the Home Depot, William Bunnell, I think he got promoted too. I don't think he's just senior director of SRE anymore. I know someone from Home Depot can tell me. He'll tell you, his statistic is really interesting. Like, they're a very conventional enterprise in the way they're, many decades old and been running things and buying IT systems just the way normal conventional enterprises do. They're in the retail space, which is a fairly conventional space and somewhat risk averse in a way. I think the key thing for him here is to show that when you do this and show some limited success, how quickly it proliferates through an enterprise. We don't normally think of that in enterprises. Traditional enterprises, we think of being sort of progress is sticky. Change is hard. Turns out not to be true. These things tend to go viral very quickly. His metric, which I love, is they went from 0 services with SLOs to 800 services inside of a year, and they add 50 a month. Right? They are nearly done for all of their production services having SLOs that they can then monitor and alert on and do things we would all recognize as standard SRE things. And they are much better off because of it. Okay, next lesson. Yes. Okay, you convince a customer, we're going to start with SLOs and SLIs. Great. Next thing, do one application first. One. All your customers will have lots of applications. Do one first with them, like work an entire example through. Okay, why? Well, first of all, some definitions. When I say application, turns out application is a very overloaded word. I hadn't really quite appreciated how much until we started talking to customers. When I say an application, I mean a discrete failure domain. If we have systems A, B, and C, and they're interdependent such that if C fails, A and B fail, well, guess what? The collection is a discrete failure domain. That's an application for this definition, okay? At least for this talk. How's that? Why do we say start with one? Well, first of all, you want to start with one because you want to just do one thing. Going from 0 to 1 is hard in an organization. Second, you want to scope it to a failure domain because it very clearly circumscribes the executives, the development teams, and the operations teams who have to be involved in the decision-making process. So you start with one, and you bound it by a discrete failure domain. That makes figuring out which teams are vital to the conversation in the beginning pretty easy or pretty straightforward to figure out. You don't want to be in the business of having to convince 300 people across 7 teams across 9 products to do a thing at the same time. You'll never be able to manage it. It'll be a mess, right? It's a standard thing. Go from 0 to 1, then from 1 to 2, then from, say, 2 to 5, to see, and then watch it proliferate from there. Also a mistake we made. We went to do, with a large customer, do some SRE work. Sorry, I have to protect the innocent. And we didn't start with one application, and that didn't end well. We had to roll it back. We had to go, you know what, stop. We're going to pick one. So we learned, again, another lesson we learned the hard way. My goal today is for you to not learn lessons the hard way, since we did. Okay, here's a non-intuitive thing. SRE is fantastic for regulated industries. That sounds weird, right? Regulated industries are super conservative, like change management. When I regulate industries, I mean financial services, healthcare, medical device manufacturers, things like that. All right, well, that probably seems weird to you. Let me get my speaker notes. Yeah, there they are. Okay, why? Why is this true? Here's an interesting thing about regulated environments. Sophisticated regulators, which is just code for regulatory environments that have existed for a while, don't actually expect 100% success or 0% errors. In fact, even in life and death regulatory environments, like say medical device environment, which is one we've been in recently, they don't have expressions of target of mortality rate and things like. No, you know what they care about? They care about risk regimes. Do you know how you take on new risk? How you trade risk versus innovation and speed? And can you prove it to us? That lines up with this SRE work really, really well. Because if we think of what we do as SREs, it's about categorizing and quantifying risk and then making principal trades between risk and speed, usually. And so to be able to connect, and this is good because it's a big gap for companies. Take a medical device company, again, because it's top of mind for me. Those used to be mostly devices with integrated circuits. They didn't have software development in the way we would think of software, or more to the point, the device's software didn't mutate much. So the regulating bodies, like the FDA, didn't care a ton about the software development practice. Like you could circumscribe that out of the risk regime. Well, guess what? The software in a pacemaker gets updated fairly frequently, or a hearing aid, or any other kind of thing. It's true. And they connect to other back-end software systems that clearly impact their performance and reliability. So now all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, expectedly I should say, the regulators care a great deal about how are you managing risk in these regimes. And you know what? There hasn't been a really great answer for that. Like ITIL is not a great answer for it because that's IT system space, or CMMI, not so much. It turns out SLOs, SLIs, and error budgets are a fantastic way to answer this question for regulators. This is an example. It's a mock. It's a made-up example, but it's a good example of a kind of an exercise we would do with a customer that I would encourage you to do as well, where after we've got good telemetry on the SLOs and the SLIs, and after we've looked at the monitoring and to see what's really achievable and all the good things, then we'll go do the big stateful inspection of the system and all of its surrounding operations and stack rank the risks in terms of bad minutes, right? Because that's how we normally denominate an error budget, is in minutes. And so the red ones, say, are the risks given the budget that will consume, that when they occur will consume more than 25% of your budget, and yellow maybe less, and green are small enough that you don't have to worry a lot for. And maybe you can trade your greens for your yellows. But the point is you can look at it and decide, I got to clear out all of my reds or I have no chance of making my SLO. And maybe I can, if I can't do one of my yellows, maybe I can trade a green. And it lets you stack rank what it is you're going to remediate in your system to get the reliability performance that you want. This is actually a more detailed and complicated topic. My colleague, Matt Brown, has a talk tomorrow on this. In the meantime, that stack rank is actually in a public-facing spreadsheet. At that URL and QR code, you can go play with it and use it or mutate it or adopt it as a way of categorizing risk in your conversations with people. We have found it to be very helpful for us. I'll also give a pointer to Matt's talk tomorrow at the end of my slides. You should definitely show up and watch it. It is a fascinating topic. But this is exactly the kind of regime that regulators want to see. This makes them very happy. So, SRE is good for regulated industries. Who knew? Okay, this ought to seem obvious, but it turns out it's not. SRE is not a giant plate of food, it's a buffet. Like, you don't have to eat it all at once. Don't try. It's okay. We have some definite opinions about the steps you should do in the order you ought to do them. We think everyone's first step should be SLIs, SLOs, and error budgets, because the rest of the steps don't mean anything. We think basically the next step for everyone is to look, so in the light of the SLIs and the SLOs that are sort of the straw person SLOs that now exist, go look at the existing monitoring and audit it and ask how many of my SLIs are properly covered by the monitoring. How many alerts do I have that don't actually have anything to do with my SLI? Like, I'm going to turn those off. Good rule of thumb, I think I might have said this last year, is when you go look at a system for the first time, you'll find roughly half the alerts, half the pager alerts have nothing to do with SLIs you have said you care about. You just turn them off. You can log the data for diagnostics later if you want to, but you just turn the alerts off, which is super reduction in toil, which is great. Bad news is roughly half of your new SLIs won't be covered by the monitoring at all. Oops. But so even at this stage, right, what you've taught your customer is they're flying more blind than they think. They're not actually getting an accurate measure of their reliability experience. So like setting that expectation is important. The third thing, which is kind of non-obvious, is really early, you want to do and model blameless postmortem culture with the people you're teaching SRE. Really important. They can't improve if they do the very human thing of blamefulness. It was Fred's fault. Fred kicked over the network cable. No. Why did the system permit the unlucky Fred to kick over the cable? Right? And we talk at length in other forums about how to do this, but you need to do that pretty early on with customers, right? So you get them talking in the language we all understand, SLOs and SLIs, and error budgets. You get the monitoring in a reasonable place so they can get accurate telemetry based on the SLIs and SLOs about how their system is working, so now you can have a conversation with data about which you agree. And then when there's a problem, because there's always a problem at some point, you do a joint postmortem with them that you make sure is blameless. That you're always blaming the system, not the humans. You get them into that mindset. When that happens, that will do two things. It will free them up mentally to make the changes they need, make them less defensive, and by the way, it'll make them less likely to blame you as humans too, right? It's about blaming the system. So you don't have to eat it all at once. You do definitely have to take it in a particular order, we think. That's our opinion. Oh, another quote from our friend William, basically saying, you don't have to do this all at once. Right? They're a traditional enterprise. They didn't do it all at once. By the way, it turned out they did just the first bit. It proliferated everywhere, and then they wound up doing the rest of it very quickly, which is a super common case. You get a tipping point. Basically, as soon as you get a few visible teams adopting SLOs and error budgets, everybody does it. Once that happens, the rest of what we would know as SRE just follows organically for companies. And it doesn't have to look exactly the way you practice it either. Heavens knows we have customers and partners who do SRE in a way that looks different than the way we do it at Google. But the fundamental principles are the same, and that's the thing we care about. Not all of your customers are going to make it the whole way, and that's okay. If all that happens is you explain SLOs and SLIs and error budgets to your customer and they don't adopt it, but they understand it, you're better off than you were. If they do adopt it, but don't enforce it, you're better off than you were. If they know they have monitoring gaps and choose not to address it, you're better off than you were. Like any progress you make with a set of customers, they will be better off and you will be better off because you'll be one step closer to having similar expectations and a similar view of performance with them. There's literally nothing you can do here. And it's going to be, some of your customers you're going to get through the SLOs and maybe the monitoring, and they're going to stop. They're like, this is just too much. We're not ready to adopt this right now. And that's okay. You shake hands. You say, you call us when you want to pick this back up. And then after an outage or two, when they realize we don't really see visibility in our system, our SLIs, we're not monitoring them particularly well or whatever, then they'll call you again and you go back. And it's fine. It's okay. It's very friendly. It's very low key. It's okay. It is not a failure mode that they don't do at all. But any bit they do is to your benefit and their benefit. Yeah, this isn't so much a lesson as a parting thought for the last couple of closing slides. This is not daunting. I mean, it might feel daunting because you haven't done it, but it actually isn't. You can do this. They can do this. You should do this. Actually, you will need to do this. You can see the earlier talk about why that is true, which I think I proved where it is true. And it's completely doable. What would I say about the last year is we have been uncomfortably successful in places where we thought we were going to meet recalcitrants. Surprisingly unsuccessful in places where we thought it would be easy. That's the way it always goes. That's what a surprise is, right? If that didn't happen that way, it literally wouldn't be a surprise. But the big takeaway is it's not as hard as it seems. You know, if you just keep some of those principles in mind, and to the extent that your customers, the consumers of your systems, are enterprises, those are actually the good places to start. And by the way, they probably represent, as a percentage, a larger percentage of your revenue anyway. So it turns out the biggest influencers of your revenue, if you want to think about it as not just guarding your SLOs, but guarding your business, are concentrated in a fairly small number of people, standard Pareto distribution. All right, there are resources to learn more. as I said, my colleague and friend Matt Brown is doing a fantastic talk tomorrow on risk analysis, where he'll go over that stack rank that I showed you and how to apply the tool. You should 100% go to that. Liz Fong-Jones is doing a great talk on distributed debugging also tomorrow. That's in the morning, but you should definitely go to that. And in the cheap plug segment, how many of you have copies or have read the original SRE book from 2016? Oh, neat. Okay, well, we're doing a new one. It'll be out at the end of July. It is available for pre-order now on Amazon. Whatever you can order it, not order it, that's up to you. That's the QR code that you can go see the awesome cover with what we think is a horn-tailed lizard of some kind. So, all right, I am scheduled to end at 2:10. Is that right? Yeah, I've got 5 minutes for questions, which is roughly timed out how I expected it. So, come to the mic, challenge me, tell me I'm full of donkey dung. Sorry, I have to watch my language. Not normally the word I would use. Or ask a question. Or otherwise, you can have 3 minutes back to, use the facilities and get a Diet Coke, whichever you prefer. Yes?
I know that you've been doing this for a year, but how long would you say these consultations or work with your customers goes?
So the question, actually, you were on a mic. Thank you. So everyone heard that. It depends. It could, just teaching them about SLOs is pretty short. You can do that in a week or two. Not hard. If they want to do the whole thing from soup to nuts, all the way down to the risk assessments and make engineering changes and stuff, that's 9 months, a year worth of work. Now, it's not an FTE year, right, because it's in fits and starts. So a human might do 4 or 5 of these in parallel. But that's kind of the duration we've been seeing for people who really, like Home Depot, I would say, took a full year to really do the whole journey. Evernote, kind of the same thing, and some others. Shopify, they announced themselves as a customer yesterday, so I'm allowed to use their name. Shopify is another good example. Other questions? I will be ruthless and leave the stage if they're like, I'm fine. No? Oh, wait. An awesome chimpanzee
I'm almost here. Okay. You said this was controversial last year.
It was?
And this is the first I've heard about that. So what was controversial?
Well, I guess it wasn't controversial enough, then I'll try harder next time. Well, the idea that for me to stand up and say it's not enough for you to do SRE, you have to actually do SRE with your customers too, was a pretty controversial. You mean I have to take pagers for them? Well, kinda, yeah, a little bit. Sorry. And there's a long argument about it, but I mean, I received many a furrowed brow, shall we say, after the talk. But if it seems completely non-controversial now, awesome, mission accomplished. I am happy to have moved the zeitgeist in 365 days.
We're good.
Thank you. Yes?
Hi. Last year you talked a lot about the interaction between the vendor and the supplier and the customer. Metric data to provide it, joining Slack channels on the first iteration of the first incident. Could you spend a little bit about your experience there?
So the question is about how we do day-to-day communications with our customers?
Yeah, well, step one, you don't want to waste time with the customer until you engage the platform provider to it.
I didn't hear all of that, I'm sorry.
When you have a step
I'm looking at Liz because she's nodding I understood this question.
Yes, last year we discussed chat ops and working together with our customers. How does that day-to-day communication change since last year?
Actually, we do less of it now than so last year we thought we were going to have to keep very long-lasting side channels with our customers. You know what we found? That was counterproductive. That actually it was better to have, for the break, fix, fire stuff, to have our support teams talking to customers and keep the long-lived back and forth, and that the support team be the public interface during incidents to the customer, and that we be working behind them to help MTTR. So that's a learning for us.
Okay.
That side channels actually were bad.
Okay, thank you.
Sir.
It says to ask you why a potato chip can is bad on a North Sea oil derrick.
Okay, so why is a potato chip bad on a North Sea oil derrick? Gold star for reading the bio. The answer is in the North Sea because of the salt content. There's a content of the air. There's a requirement called ATEC. Basically, it's the probability of static discharge in a flammable environment. And anything of metal, particularly anything cylindrical that might otherwise amplify radio waves, increases ambient energy in the air and is actually a flammability risk. And I know this is true because I had a colleague who brought a Pringles can because he was hungry and he was eating to a North Sea oil derrick and nearly caused a fire. So that is why Pringles cans are bad ideas in North Sea oil derricks. But thank you for asking. Okay, I think we are at time. One more? Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay. I was just curious, who within the organization gets that relationship started with your customers?
So the way we have chosen to implement it, because we are a scarce resource, like Google has lots of customers and not so many CREs, is the sales humans nominate customers, and then some sales executroid stack ranks them and says they're important this way, and then we go through and we say, actually that's not true, they're very nice, they really are very nice people. We go through and we go, is this customer willing, yes, no, like we get a willingness veto, and so say we have capacity for 3 in Sunnyvale right at this moment, we just pick the top 3 off the stack rank that we have capacity for, but our goal, it's in our charter, is we don't want to exist a few years from now. Like if we are a team of 1,000 people doing this a few years from now, we have failed. The goal here is to make it easy and frictionless to have an ecosystem of people who are either delivering SRE or teaching your SRE to the world, to make it easy. A very quick story, Kurt, I'll get to you, I swear. Okay. When I was a kid, I'm going to date myself, when I was 6 in 1978, my father decided he was going to buy a personal computer for our house. He went to the largest retailer of personal computers in the United States, Macy's, by the way, 1978. He bought a personal computer. He came home with 2 things, a giant box and a human named Fred. And Fred, the human from Macy's, unpacked the box and set up the computer and told us about the tape drive, yes, tape drive, monitor and keyboard and booting up and software and things that were nowhere in our vocabulary in 1978 outside of a university. Now that's a charming story now. We laugh, ha, who would need Fred? I have my nephew who can teach me these things if I need to, right? Or whomever, my spouse who works at Google. What I tell people, if you ask anyone a series, I say we are a team of Freds. 5 years from now, it should be, you had a team of humans who taught people SRE? That's so funny and quaint and cool. So, I mean, that's actually our goal. Kurt, thank you.
So you said start with SLIs and SLOs, and before setting up the program here, we did a very informal and not heavily subscribed poll to find out what sort of topics people cared to hear about here at SRECon. The single most common request had to do with how do I do SLAs right, or SLOs right. And so I'm going to ask that question to you is, what is the source of this angst? Because you expressed that it should be simple and easy.
It's the idea, hold on. So don't try to do your SLO. Let's define what right means in an SLO. Right means incrementally better. Right means an SLO, your SLO today does a better job than it did yesterday telling you, predicting for you whether your customers hate you or not, whether they're in pain. Right? Stop holding yourself to a standard of perfect. It doesn't happen. You're going to renegotiate your SLOs every quarter anyway because your business environment is going to change. So what you do is you start with the SLIs. One of the things I can measure from the perspective of my user, of my customer, that if I said to my customer, I am measuring this thing, they would say, yes, we agree, that's useful to measure. Like, we would like to know what that measurement is also because yes, we agree, that would tell you something about how we're experiencing your system. And then you make some value judgments about what you think those numbers should look like after you've measured them. And the way you know you're right or wrong, this is a wonderful thing, is customer happiness is on a knee with reliability. What I mean is there is very definitely a number, and you will experience it, everyone has, of reliability under which your customers will line up with pitchforks and torches, and you will not be long employed, over which they will be indifferent. If you're an organization that already has, say, a support ticketing system, you can backtest this data pretty easily by looking at your support tickets. If you don't already have that, you're starting from a green field, pick something that seems reasonable, and every month ask, are my customers yelling at me? If they're not yelling at me, if most of my customers seem happy most of the time, I'm pretty much on the right track with my SLO. And I might choose to play with it a little bit, make it a little stricter here, a little stricter there, but I probably don't have a lot of monkeying I have to do with it. And so I think a lot of angst for people is they look at it and they see that it is a number or a set of numbers and they go, and they treat it like an SAT exam, like there's a right answer. No. The right answer is the number that is a little better today than it was yesterday at predicting your customer's happiness. Hold yourself to that standard, you're in good shape.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm out of time. Thank you very much. Lovely to meet all of you.